Two cops thought they'd caught an easy target. What they didn't know was that he ran the entire department. The sound of tires crunching gravel filled the quiet evening air as James Whitmore, a 45-year-old man with a calm demeanor and a reputation for leadership, turned onto Edgewood Avenue. He was heading home after a long but rewarding day spent meeting with community leaders in Atlanta, Georgia. His car, a modest black sedan, blended effortlessly into the suburban streets. His thoughts drifted to his wife's famous pot roast waiting at home. Then blue and red lights flashed in his rearview mirror, slicing through the night like an alarm bell. James's grip on the steering wheel tightened. He glanced down, 29 in a 35. No speeding. No broken tail lights. No reason to be stopped. Still, the siren wailed behind him. "Stay calm," he muttered, signaling and pulling over to the side of the road. He knew the drill. Hands visible. Movements slow. Polite demeanor. It was a routine he'd mastered, not because he'd done anything wrong, but because in situations like these, appearances could mean everything. A police officer approached briskly, flashlight in hand. The beam cut through the dim interior of James's car. Another officer hovered near the rear bumper, hand resting on his holstered weapon. "You in a hurry tonight?" the first officer barked, suspicion thick in his tone. "No, sir," James replied evenly, his voice calm but firm. "Just heading home." The flashlight swept across James's face, lingered for a second too long, then darted toward his lap and console before returning to his face. "License and registration," the officer demanded, ignoring James's answer. James reached slowly toward the glove compartment, narrating each motion. "I'm getting my registration now. My license is in my wallet. I'll reach for it after this." The officer didn't respond, but his posture stiffened. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" he asked, though the question sounded more like an accusation. Before James could answer, the officer cut him off. "You were driving erratically back there, swerving into the other lane." James frowned. "With respect, sir, I wasn't swerving. My dash cam can verify that." "Dash cam, huh?" the officer snapped. "That'll be confiscated for evidence. Step out of the vehicle." James blinked, surprised by the sudden escalation. "Is there a problem, officer?" "I'm complying fully." The officer's jaw clenched. "I said step out of the vehicle. Now." James's stomach churned. He unbuckled his seatbelt and opened the door slowly, hands raised in clear view. The second officer moved in fast, grabbing his arm and yanking him toward the patrol car. "Is this necessary?" James asked, voice controlled but firm. "I've done nothing wrong." "Resisting, huh?" the first officer sneered. "You want to play that game? Fine by me." The cold metal of the handcuffs bit into James's wrists. His mind raced. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was profiling. Plain and simple. As they shoved him into the back of the squad car, James glanced down the street. A few neighbors peeked through their blinds, their silhouettes faint in the glow of porch lights. No one stepped outside. But this wasn't over. The officers had no idea who they had just arrested. And he wasn't planning to stay silent for long. The patrol car rattled as it rolled down the street. James sat stiffly in the back seat, his eyes on the window, watching familiar landmarks blur past. But his mind wasn't on the scenery. He was trying to process the absurdity of what had just happened. Up front, the two officers chatted casually, as if they hadn't just handcuffed and detained a man without cause. The younger one, Officer Zane, glanced back through the rearview mirror. "So, what's your story? Late-night drug run, or you just like giving us a hard time?" James met his gaze, unwavering. "I'm just a man trying to get home." "Yeah, sure," the other officer, stocky and red-faced, named Officer Tom, snorted. "We hear that all the time. Reckless drivers always have an excuse." James bit his tongue. Arguing wouldn't help. He took a deep breath, mentally running through his options. He knew his rights. He also knew the system, and the odds that it would favor him right now were slim. When they arrived at the precinct, the fluorescent lights cast a harsh glare over the holding area. Zane removed James's cuffs with an almost mocking flourish. "Welcome to our humble abode. You're going to be here for a while." "Am I being charged?" James asked calmly, rubbing his wrists. Tom smirked. "We'll let you know once we figure that out." "Sit tight." James was led into a small cold holding cell. The door clanged shut behind him, the echo lingering in the air. He sat on the bench, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts. He had spent years building a career rooted in justice and fairness, yet now, he was experiencing the very abuse of power he dedicated his life to eradicating. Outside the cell, the two officers leaned against a desk, laughing quietly as they reviewed his license and car registration. "Nothing out of the ordinary," Zane muttered, sounding almost disappointed. "Doesn't matter," Tom replied with a smirk. "We'll find something. Guys like him always have skeletons in the closet." James overheard the exchange. His expression remained unreadable. Seated with hands clasped and posture steady, he wasn't angry. He was calculating. He knew his patience would pay off. Hours dragged by. Other officers came and went, casting curious glances at the man in the cell. None of them seemed to recognize him, but James didn't expect them to. He was new to the area, having taken his position only 3 weeks earlier. Finally, just as dawn began to streak the sky with faint orange hues, he heard footsteps approaching. A stern-looking officer, clearly of higher rank, stopped in front of the cell. Her badge read Lieutenant Morgan. She carried an air of authority and professionalism that immediately set her apart from the other two. She frowned as she glanced at James, then back at the paperwork in her hand. "What's going on here?" Zane stepped forward. "Picked him up last night for reckless driving and resisting arrest." Morgan arched an eyebrow. "Reckless driving? Where's the evidence?" "We haven't processed it yet," Tom said casually, still leaning against the desk. Morgan turned her attention to James. "Sir, do you have any idea why you were stopped?" James stood, meeting her gaze calmly. "I was told it was for reckless driving, which I categorically deny. I also have a dashcam that can verify my version of events." Her expression hardened. She looked back at the two officers. "You didn't review his dashcam?" Tom shrugged. "We didn't get to it yet." Morgan exhaled sharply, clearly displeased. "Get it. Now. And Zane, my office. Now." As the two officers slunk away, James knew the tide was beginning to turn. But this was only the start of their reckoning. The cold metal bench pressed against James's back as he sat in the holding cell, watching the precinct buzz with activity. The hours stretched on, punctuated only by the occasional shuffle of papers or distant conversation. Despite the stillness around him, James's mind was anything but quiet. He thought about the night's events, replaying them like a film, every sharp word, every unnecessary escalation. All of it was a painful reminder of the deep flaws in the system he had spent years trying to fix. His new role as police chief had been an opportunity to address these issues from the inside, to create a culture of accountability. And now here he was, living the very injustice he had vowed to dismantle. Footsteps interrupted his thoughts. Lieutenant Morgan returned, holding a tablet. She gestured for him to approach the bars. "We reviewed your dashcam footage," she said, her tone clipped but professional. "I've also spoken with the arresting officers. Let me be clear, this should never have happened. The footage contradicts their report entirely." James raised an eyebrow. He wasn't surprised, but he was waiting for her to continue. "I'll be releasing you immediately," she added. "But I'd like to discuss next steps privately." Moments later, James was out of the cell and seated across from Morgan in her office. The room was stark, a bare desk, 2 chairs, and a small file cabinet.
No frills. No distractions.
Just business. I'll be filing a report against Zane and Tom, Morgan began, folding her hands on the desk. But there's something I need to ask. She hesitated, clearly weighing her words. Who are you, really? You're far too composed for someone who just spent the night in a holding cell over nothing. James leaned back slightly, offering her a small, measured smile. I appreciate your diligence, Lieutenant. But let's just say I've been in situations like this before. I've learned to stay calm. Morgan studied him for a moment, then gave a slow nod. Fair enough. But I have a feeling this isn't the last we'll hear of this situation. As James stepped out of the precinct, the early morning sun warmed his face, but the weight of the night still hung heavy on his shoulders. He didn't head straight home. Instead, he drove to his office, parked in his reserved space, and walked through the front doors of the police headquarters, the very building he now oversaw. His assistant, Anita, looked up from her desk, surprised.
Chief Whitmore, you're here early.
James gave her a nod, his expression unreadable. It's been a long night. Anita, could you prepare a briefing room for me? I need to address the department this afternoon. Anita nodded quickly, sensing the seriousness in his voice. James stepped into his office and closed the door behind him.
He exhaled slowly.
He knew this moment was bigger than him. This wasn't just about what had happened the night before, it was about what his experience represented. The public trusted him to lead, to protect, and to hold others accountable. That responsibility was immense. But James welcomed it. Still, before he could act, there was one more storm to face: the courtroom, where everything would come to light. The courtroom was packed. Word had spread quickly about the incident, and local media outlets were eager to cover it. Cameras weren't allowed inside, but that didn't stop reporters from lining the courthouse steps, ready to pounce the moment the hearing ended. Inside, James sat quietly at the defendant's table, his lawyer Sandra Reyes flipping through a thick folder of evidence. Sandra was a force to be reckoned with, sharp, unrelenting, and known for dismantling weak arguments with surgical precision. Across the room, Officers Zane and Tom sat beside their department-appointed attorney. Zane looked nervous, his foot tapping uncontrollably beneath the table. Tom tried to appear unfazed, leaning back in his chair with a smug expression that didn't quite reach his eyes. The judge, an older man with a no-nonsense demeanor, entered and called the session to order. We are here today to address the charges brought against Mr. James Whitmore. Prosecution, you may proceed. The prosecutor, a young, slightly hesitant lawyer, stood and began outlining the initial report. On the night in question, the defendant was observed driving recklessly, swerving into another lane. Upon being stopped by Officers Zane and Tom, he became uncooperative and resisted arrest. Sandra barely suppressed a smile. She leaned over to James and whispered, "They're walking right into it." When it was her turn to speak, Sandra stood confidently, her voice firm and commanding. "Your Honor, the charges against my client are not only baseless, they are the result of racial profiling and a blatant abuse of power. To prove this, I'd like to present video evidence that directly contradicts the officer's statements." The judge nodded. "Proceed." Sandra gestured to the bailiff, who dimmed the lights as the dashcam footage began to play. The courtroom fell silent. The video showed James driving steadily, staying within his lane. The speedometer read a constant 29 miles per hour. There were no sudden movements, no traffic violations, just a man driving home. The patrol car appeared in the rearview mirror, lights flashing without cause. Next came the body cam footage. The courtroom watched as Zane and Tom approached James's vehicle, their aggression evident from the start. Zane could be heard muttering under his breath, another one of them causing trouble. Tom chuckled. Figures. Gasps rippled through the room. The judge's brow furrowed deeply as he shot a sharp glance toward the officers. Sandra paused the footage and addressed the court. This is the professionalism displayed by Officers Zane and Tom. Now let's fast forward to the arrest itself. The footage continued. James was calm and cooperative, narrating his every move as he reached for his registration and license. The contrast between his respectful demeanor and the officer's escalating hostility was stark. By the time the video ended, the courtroom was tense. Sandra turned to the jury. This isn't just an abuse of power. It's a direct violation of my client's rights, rooted in bias and prejudice. The prosecutor stood, visibly flustered. The officers had believed they had probable cause. Sandra cut in sharply. Probable cause based on what? Driving safely? Following instructions? Or perhaps, she paused, was it the color of his skin? The judge banged his gavel lightly. Let's keep this focused, counselor. Sandra's voice softened, but her words remained just as powerful. Your Honor, before we proceed further, my client has something to share with the court. James stood, adjusting his tie. He scanned the courtroom, making direct eye contact with the officers before turning to address the judge. My name is James Whitmore, he began, his voice calm but unwavering. I am the chief of police for this city. I was appointed 3 weeks ago to lead this department and address the very issues you've seen here today. A stunned silence fell over the room. I chose not to disclose my position earlier because I wanted the truth to come out organically, without bias or interference. And now it has. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Zane's face turned ghostly pale. Tom's smug expression dissolved instantly. The judge banged his gavel again, calling for silence. James continued, his words ringing with clarity. This isn't just about me. This is about a system that allows officers like Zane and Tom to operate without accountability. That ends now. But this moment wasn't just a revelation, it was a reckoning. One that would echo far beyond the courtroom walls. As James took his seat, the tension was palpable. His final words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Zane and Tom sat frozen, their expressions twisted with shock and fear. The judge called for a brief recess to let the weight of what had just transpired settle. When the court reconvened, everything had changed. The prosecution offered no further arguments. The judge dismissed the charges against James immediately. But this was only the beginning. As James stepped outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed him. Cameras flashed, microphones reached toward his face. Chief Whitmore, do you have a statement about the case? One of them called out. James raised his hand, signaling for quiet. The crowd fell still, hanging on his next words. This case isn't just about me, he said, his voice steady and resolute. It's about accountability. It's about ensuring that every person, regardless of who they are, is treated with the respect and dignity they deserve. As a police chief, I'm committed to building a department that values integrity and fairness. And as a citizen, I will continue to fight for justice. The media frenzy continued, but James didn't linger. He had more urgent matters to address. The fallout from the case was swift. Officers Zane and Tom were immediately suspended, pending an internal investigation. Public outrage grew as the dashcam and bodycam footage were released to the press. Protests erupted across the city. Community leaders rallied, demanding reform, transparency, and better training within the department. James's leadership took on a new weight. He called an emergency meeting, gathering officers at the precinct. Standing at the front of the room, he addressed them with unwavering conviction. What happened to me last night wasn't an isolated incident, James said, scanning the room. It was a symptom of a larger problem. And as long as I'm chief, I won't tolerate it. We are here to serve and protect, not to harass and intimidate. If you can't uphold those values, this isn't the place for you. Silence followed. His words cut through any lingering doubt. Over the following weeks, sweeping reforms were implemented. Mandatory bias training. Stricter oversight. An anonymous reporting system for officer misconduct. And that was just the beginning. The community began to feel the shift. Though trust wouldn't be rebuilt overnight, hope had returned. Months later, James sat on a panel at a local town hall. The auditorium was full. During the open forum, a young man stood and spoke, his voice trembling slightly. "Chief Whitmore," he said, "what you went through, it could have been me. It could have been any of us. Thank you for standing up. Not just for yourself, but for all of us." James nodded, his heart full but heavy with responsibility. "Change doesn't happen overnight," he replied. "But together, we can build a system that truly serves everyone." As the town hall came to a close, James lingered by the door, watching people leave, with conversation sparked and hope renewed. He knew the fight wasn't over. But he was ready for it. And now it's up to us, the viewers, the citizens, the community, to keep that fight alive. If we see injustice, we must speak up. If we want change, we must demand it. Together, we have the power to build a world where accountability isn't just a promise. It's a reality.